and your hip breaks.
Yeah.
What happened, and then what were the knock-on effects?
Wow. You know, this was, make sure that this is incredibly important. At track practice, I'm coming around the curve onto the straightaway, and I broke my hip. And there was no trauma involved. Nobody hit me. I didn't fall. It just broke because, you know, cut to a few years later, I finally get diagnosed with this degenerative bone disease. And at the time, being 16 years old, you know, you have the hormones of like a Greek god, you know, so, you know, you get the kind of standard of care, you know, take these NSAIDs, stay off the leg, you'll get better. And I did, but nobody stopped to ask the question, how can a young man break his hip just from running? And once I finally got this diagnosis, it felt good to know what the issue was, but also it kind of sent my world into a tailspin.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that it broke. It's really crazy that they didn't ask why it happened.
Exactly,
but the thing that I find most interesting in the story is that you decide to ask the question, what are my vertebrae made of?
Yeah.
And taking that ownership, which you must have been like your late teens at that point.
Yeah, so this is so this was 20 years old when I finally get the diagnosis. And I'm in college at the time. And, you know, I went from like a chronic kind of nuisance of a pain to chronic debilitating pain over the course of a few weeks. And this is important and I always like to share this whenever I can. My very first physician, you know, he put my MRI up for me to see, and he told me that I had the spine of an 80-year-old man. You know, I had 2 ruptured discs, and my vertebrae were deteriorating. And so when he says this to me, you know, I'm immediately like, okay, so what do we do? Like, let's fix it, you know? And he's like, you know, I'm sorry, son, there's nothing you can do about this. And what happened, and I know you've heard about this several times, the placebo effect is something where you get a positive injunction from somebody who's an authority figure, and you proceed to have certain symptoms happen or changes in your physiology. And a lot of people don't realize this, but placebos are actually 33% effective. That's the power of the mind. But what he did for me was something called a nocebo effect. This is giving somebody a negative injunction that something bad is going to happen, and your physiology begins to change from that. And so I spent the next 2.5 years in a lot of pain, a lot of drugs, prescribed and over the counter, and just laying on my floor, you know, because not only was this painful, but it was embarrassing. You know, I went from kind of being one of the cool guys to like, I'm walking around campus with a back brace and just, you know, really kind of losing myself. I saw different doctors. I, you know, went through the whole gamut of why me, why did this happen to me, why won't somebody help me? And really playing this victim role. And it wasn't until I actually decided to get well that everything changed. And most people never do that with their bodies, with their health, with their relationships. It's mostly like, I'll see what'll happen, wishful thinking, I'll give this a try. But when you really decide something, you're cutting away the possibility of anything else but that thing. And I'm a big student of lexicon, and the word decision is from the Latin de, meaning from, and caedere, which means to cut. So when you make a real decision about something, you cut away the possibility of anything else but that thing. And so I decided, no matter what, I'm going to get well. And that sent me, and it wasn't like, you know, the clouds parted and like the sun shined and everything was okay. I'm a very analytical person as well. And so I put a plan together. I decided, and now it's time to do something. You know, number one, put a plan together, and that plan entailed 3 specific things. I changed the way I was eating, which giving my body the actual raw materials that it needed to regenerate me was important. And I was on what I called the tough diet at the time, which is typical university food. So I'm no joke, I'm eating pizza daily. My vitamin C is coming like from Sunny D. And so it's no wonder I was made out of terrible stuff, you know? And so I asked this really important question, which you mentioned, okay, if my spine is deteriorating, if my bones are deteriorating, what is it actually made of? And that set me down this incredible path of discovery, because what we hear in kind of common culture is, you know, if you want strong, healthy bones, drink milk. And come to find out, calcium is one of the least important things. And even getting it from your diet, it doesn't exactly work in your body the way that we're marketed to because it's marketing. And so I found out that things like silica, magnesium, sulfur-bearing amino acids, all these things are in some cases even more important. So I start to get all those nutrients in my body through food, primarily. Once I really got it, like food is gonna.
And was that, so how did you get that? Because that's where it's becoming a lot more popular now, but when you would have been going through this, people didn't really think like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is around the time I was thinking if I was eating licorice and it was fine because it was fat-free, right? And somebody said, well, I think if you eat too much sugar, it turns into fat. And like that didn't even make sense to me. I was like, how would that be possible?
Yeah, especially I'm from the Midwest. And so like there was like a wild oats market. Whole Foods had just opened. And so I think it's really important, the environment. You know, when I had some friends, they would take me to the stores, and then, you know, that gradually got me into like, not just the supplement aisle. And so I just began to flood my body with all these important nutrients and also hydration. Your disc in between the vertebrae and your spine. And you would think like, if I want these to be more hydrated, I need to drink more water, but it doesn't work like that. Your disc get hydrated through a process called remote diffusion. And so literally it's like the last place in your body that gets nutrients and hydration. And so you needed to really super hydrate yourself. Make sure your body has an abundance, like an overflow of nutrients to make sure they get to the right place. So that was number one, was nutrition. Number two was movement. And so exercise is really about two main things. Number one is assimilation. And I came across some research that showed that when you actually are doing walking while taking on specific supplements for your bones, your bone density goes even higher, all right? Because that walking helps your body to assimilate. Number two is elimination, you know, elimination of toxins. Because your lymphatic system, which, especially when you're getting healthier, your body is trading out a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of dead cells, there's a lot of metabolic waste products. And so how do you get that stuff out of your system? You have to move, because your lymphatic system doesn't have a pump like your cardiovascular system does. And you actually have 4 times more lymph than you do blood. And so that movement was so important in healing. And here's the problem, is that oftentimes when you have, you know, an injury or an issue like this, we're told not to do anything. That's often the worst thing you can do, because things will start to atrophy. If you don't use it, you lose it. And so I just started to, and it's, of course, if anybody's dealing with like an acute problem right now, like take a day or two off, but I encourage people to do what you can in an intelligent way. And so for me, I could barely walk properly. And so I started off on a stationary bike, progressed to treadmill, I started jogging a little bit. Eventually I picked up the weights again. And, you know, just to jump really quickly to the end of the story, I'd lost 28 pounds in the next 6 weeks.
Wow.
And the pain I've been experiencing for 2.5 years was gone. But the third and most important part, now I know, was the rest and recovery, right? It seems like I was resting a lot by not doing anything, but it really wasn't. You know, it was a lot of suffering, and my greatest struggle was at night going to bed, because the pain was so bad it would wake me up. And so I was on, you know, various medications, and I basically had to drug myself to not wake up. And so it was like a pseudo sleep, and it would take several hours before I really like felt like I was awake. And the things that I was doing during the day, changing my lifestyle, showed up for me on the pillow, because what I really wanted to promote for people is this understanding that if you're not sleeping well, you're not healing well. And this is where your body releases the vast majority of human growth hormone, of the, you know, these various anabolic hormones, reparative enzymes. So when my sleep got improved, I got better so fast. And so I shifted all my coursework over to biology and kinesiology, and eventually opened a clinical practice. And you know, oftentimes I would get those people who they were told there's nothing you can do. You know, you have type 2 diabetes, blood sugars 400 without metformin. There's nothing you can do about it. And consistently seeing these folks be able to naturally regulate their blood sugar, oftentimes get off their medications, insulin, things like that. Because where there's a will, there's 10,000 ways. But it's also understanding that, first of all, just acknowledging that it is possible.
And that's what I love about your story, man. That, like, hearing you tell that, and I've heard you quote the Einstein quote before, that the most important decision anyone will ever make is whether or not they live in a hostile or a friendly universe. Which, A, most people don't recognize that as a choice or a decision.
Yeah.
And then 2, that from that, then people will take action because they believe that they will get an outcome. How did you come to that decision, that you live in a universe that's going to work for you?
Yeah.
When the doctor is the one telling you, multiple doctors, in fact, because you said, look, I was, you know, conscious of going and getting multiple opinions. This wasn't one guy.
Yeah.
They all said the same thing. So how in the face of that do you make that decision one day, I am going to get better?
I think it's really valuable to understand the benefit of rock bottom. You know, like for me, after getting those, the words from the other doctors that, you know, there's nothing, you know, the same diagnosis, I had a choice to make. I'm either going to buy into this and continue to live as a victim, or I'm going to do something about it. At least try, you know. But for me, it's beyond try. Like, it's the decision, right? And so how I got to that place really was, I had nothing to lose at that point. I can continue as things are and continue in this suffering. And I think it was just a matter of like realizing that, and I think this is really important, even though there are other people in our lives that might care for us, they don't walk in our shoes. So when the physician would tell me that, there's nothing that I could do, I knew, like, it hit me, like, they're not laying at home thinking about me. I'm thinking about them and why they can't help me. I have to really take responsibility for myself. And it's just basic logic, If somebody's saying they can't help you, believe them, And so I made the decision, like, if I'm gonna get better, I need to do it. I need to take action. It doesn't mean I'm not gonna have great people to support me along the way. But, as Jim Rohn says, no one can do your push-ups for you. So I really had to take action. And it became, and also I want to share this, is that if you really want something, you should make a study of it. Especially if you don't necessarily have a blueprint for a successful relationship, make it a study. If you're not doing well with your finances, make it a study.
And what does that look like for you?
I generally go right to the medical journals. I dig through there. And another quote from Einstein is that, if you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough. And so I really strive to make sense of these things that can be incredibly complex, but for no reason. It wasn't until I really honored my own voice and my gift in helping these things to really make sense for people. And so I'll dig around in that data, and that's the first thing I'll do. And then I'll look for some anecdotal and evidence as well, people telling stories about it. But here's something else I do. I also, and this is the scary part, I also look at the problems with stuff. I also look at the things that are against what I might be believing. Most people don't want to do that. Like, we believe this particular supplement is going to work and it's the best thing, since sliced bread. And then there's these other things that say, hey, wait a minute, this might not be the case. You have to have the courage to look at this too and come to a truly well-evolved thought construct. And we all have that opportunity, but we tend to just want to believe what we believe and look for things to affirm that. And you got to be careful with studies that do the same thing and who's funding the study as well. So I really get to that level most of the time in my research.
It's really interesting to me how, and look, like you said, look at the benefits of rock bottom, but it's really interesting to me how early you came to a lot of this. And I find how people tell their own story to be fascinating beyond all measure. And the opening of your bio says, the first half of my childhood was spent in an idyllic suburban neighborhood, and the second half of my childhood was in the rough and tumble inner cities around gangs and drugs. And you said the power came from both places, and it really helped me understand perspective. How much of that, if at all, played into your ability to sort of see through the trappings of everyone telling you it can't be solved, in a way that you say it's just logic, but I think most people fall prey to that and they live there for 60, 70 years.
Yeah.
So how much of that mindset that you got from that sort of dual beginning do you think played into it?
Man, that really hit an emotional chord, hearing you say that. That initial environment was really, it lays a foundation. Well, before the age of about 7, we're in like a theta brainwave state where a lot of things kind of get deeper into our psyche and our subconscious, our programming. And so it's really important, especially for parents, and people who are just, that can be involved in kids' lives, to really understand how impressionable they are. And so I really got a great formatting disc from my grandmother, who really kind of instilled this greatness. She instilled the value of education. I loved learning. Like, I loved the process of learning. And so I really picked up early on that you don't want to just learn stuff. You want to become good at learning. And when I shifted my residency, going from this very protected, safe, loving atmosphere, I'm in an environment where, there's a lot of abuse, physical abuse towards myself and my 2 younger siblings, abuse with my mother and stepfather, and the fight, physical fighting. Holidays were not like they are now, like get-togethers and family fun. We know the holiday there's gonna be, police are gonna show up, Wow. That environment also taught me something really, really valuable, which is, even though things aren't going well, even though we're short on money, there's always a way to figure it out. No matter how bad things look, we're gonna be okay. So that really was a powerful seed, and combine that with the sense of greatness, the sense of the value of education, the sense of there's always a way to figure something out, really helped that moment of insight to take place, of that decision, that moment of decision. And this is the first time I've articulated this, but that's really how those two things come together.
Dude, I'm stoked that you shared that. That's it's so powerful, and in taking you as a whole and watching your show and watching you on other people's shows, there's this incredible Zen-like quality to your delivery, to your mission, to what you want to do. Like, everything about it is so even keel, right? Because what I find with people that make that transition is it normally breaks them. And one of the things that I'm most intrigued about in life is, and I have the chills, we were just talking about this before we started rolling camera, where you were saying with schools, right? Do you go to one ultra tailored, or do you go, that's gonna be the hardship where my kids have to adapt? And I don't know what's better, because the number of people that are broken by the inner cities, the percentage has got to be absurd, right?
Yeah.
In 80, 90, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
But the people that make it, the ones that find that center, whether it's to be self-centered or not, they find that sense of self. When you said that, that really hit me. That finding that sense of self, not letting the outside world dictate who they're gonna be. Like, now all of a sudden adversity is not such a big deal, because you've got like that compass inside of you and you know where you're going. That feels to me very appropriate for what you've become known for, which is sleep. Which even your own publisher was like, write a diet book and you'll be huge and famous and we'll all be rich. Yeah. And you were like, but that's not the truth that needs to be told.
Yeah.
Did that play in? Like, was that a moment of Shawn knowing who he is and what he's trying to do, and he's just gonna get to that end no matter what?
You know what? Wow. Yes, that definitely was. You know, I don't want to cut corners. I wanted, you know, integrity is a big word for me. And I wanted to take righteous action. You know, this is all bigger than us. You know, the impact that you're making, the legacy that you're leaving, you know, is so powerful. And we're part of like a big change that's happening with our culture overall, you know. And I knew that this particular topic is, and me being a nutritionist, like, I was all like, food matters, food first, food is the most important thing. But in my practice and seeing people coming in that, you know, we've got these folks over here, you know, 80% of the time are able to reverse type 2 diabetes, heart disease, get off their lisinoprils and all this different stuff. And then we've got this category of people who just like literally sometimes would ironically kind of keep me up at night. Like, what is wrong? Like, I'm doing all these things right. Are they lying to me? And it wasn't until I started to ask people about their sleep that it just like, it changed everything. And this was about 6 years ago. And so then, and here's the key, I can't just tell people they need to sleep more. You know this, like, people don't want to change that much. Like, we want change, but we want it to be a little bit, right? And so I found clinically proven strategies that are super easy to implement, almost things that can happen on automatic to help them improve their sleep quality, right? And once we did that, it's like the floodgates would open for people. You know, who've been struggling for sometimes, you know, 15, 20 years with their weight. Finally, the weight comes off, you know? And seeing people struggling with heart disease or high cholesterol, you know, the so-called bad cholesterol, and seeing those numbers finally get regulated once we got their sleep optimized. And I knew that this was an incredibly important part of the conversation that was left out. And as we'll talk about, I know now that our sleep quality is more important than our diet and exercise combined, and what it does for our health and also literally our physical appearance. Fascinating stuff, how much more fat you lose when you get optimal sleep. It's insane.
That's a bold statement. So walk me through, what are some of the just core benefits that I'm gonna get, assuming that I'm sleeping suboptimally? Like, why is that a problem? Since that's probably one of the most celebrated like things, like when you get a little sleep, people like champion you. Normally I'd sleep 5 to 6 hours a night with no alarm. Okay, I haven't set an alarm in 15 years. So that was my cycle. I go to bed early, very consistently. My diet is on point, my exercise is on point. And so I'd wake up feeling awesome.
Yeah.
And so I thought, this is cash money. But because I don't set an alarm, that my sleep cycle will change. And right now I'm getting like 7 to 9 hours out of nowhere and super consistently. And I literally have no idea why. I'm warmer now. So I used to be freezing cold at all times. And then at the same time that and I don't know, correlated, causative, no idea, I've started being warmer while I sleep and then during the day. So what are like the core components of sleep? Was something bad happening to me or less than optimal when I was only getting 6 hours, even though I felt good?
Yeah.
Any correlation between the heat and the extra sleep?
There's a lot to unpack there. Number one, what's so interesting is that you were doing something exceptionally right as far as what the research shows with improving your sleep, which is you were going to bed kind of consistently a little bit earlier than other folks might. And so what we call this is this anabolic window, or what we call money time sleep. And this is generally between the hours of 10 and 2 because it's more lined up with your natural melatonin secretion. So if you go to sleep during those times, you actually spend more time in the deepest, most anabolic stages of sleep, and you tend to produce more human growth hormone than other folks. So you were already winning with that. This is why you have a tendency to feel better even if you're getting less sleep, because this isn't called sleep more. Right? It's sleep smarter. And there are many people who sleep, 8 to 9 hours and they wake up feeling like straight up, hot garbage. You know what I'm saying? And they're just wondering why. It's because it's the quality of sleep. And when I say quality of sleep, what does that mean? Let's break that down. So your sleep is regulated by changes in your brain waves. It's really fascinating stuff. And we still don't know really what sleep is. Trying to define sleep is like trying to define when Forrest Gump is like, life is like a box of chocolates, sleep is like pretending to be dead. We don't really know, right? But we do know the changes that happen in the brain. We cycle from kind of a normal waking state with gamma, beta. We're probably in beta right now. We move to alpha, theta, delta is where that deep anabolic dreamless sleep takes place. And we need all of them. And there's a certain percentage we spend in each that helps to rejuvenate our mind and bodies. And if you optimize certain things, you'll do it more efficiently. One of those gear shifts, like if you think about your body like this kind of manual transmission, is melatonin. Like people hear about melatonin as a sleep hormone. It just helps your body to efficiently go through your sleep cycles. And if your melatonin is suppressed by various things, I'll share a couple, then you're not going through those efficiently. And you can wake up feeling like a piñata after the party the next day, even though you're spending all this time on the mattress. So that's number one. Number two, there's this interesting process called thermoregulation. There's a natural drop in your core body temperature at night to help facilitate sleep for all of us, if things are running properly. But what was fascinating, and I shared a study about this, is that they tested insomniacs, and everyone in this particular clinical study all had too high body temperature at night. It would not go down. And so what they did was they fit them with these thermosuits, right, that lowers their skin temperature, not even their core temperature, just 1 degree, and virtually eliminated all their symptoms of insomnia.
Whoa.
Ambien can't do that, all right? And it's as simple as paying attention to how your body temperature influences your sleep. And so with your body temperature changing like that, it's kind of feeling more of an insulation. As a result of having more sleep, there's a ton of different things that could be correlated there. So I'm not gonna say that the sleep is a causative factor, but it's really interesting how your body does change in accordance to sleep. There's a natural rise in your core body temperature as the day goes, as the night goes on, that helps to kind of wake you up. So what I did want to share though, when I said that kind of bold statement in the beginning, when we're talking about how sleep influences your body composition, I think everybody needs to know this. This study really blew my mind, and this was done at the University of Chicago. And they took people and they put them on a calorie-restricted diet, kind of typical stuff again I'm taught in college, to see the impact on weight loss when they're sleep deprived or getting enough sleep, right? So they put the people on this particular diet, monitor everything. One phase of the study, they're getting 8.5 hours of sleep, all right? And then they track all their metrics. Another phase of the study, same exact diet, same exercise, they don't change anything else, but now they sleep deprive them and they take away 3 hours of sleep. And so now they're getting 5.5 hours of sleep versus 8.5 hours of sleep. At the end of the study, they found that when individuals were well rested, they burned 55% more body fat just by getting more sleep. And so the question is, how does this happen? Melatonin, when I talked about this a little bit earlier, it's not just that it's involved in sleep, it's also involved in fat loss. And this study, this was done in the journal Pineal Research, found that melatonin production helps to increase your body's mobilization of something called brown adipose tissue, right? This is a type of fat that burns fat, all right? And the reason that it's brown is that it has more mitochondria. So it's very energy dense, right? These mitochondria, just for people who, I'm sure people have heard of this, but it's like these energy power plants in your cells that are creating the energy currency of your body, like how you experience energy, the energy exchange, something called ATP. And so when you are producing adequate melatonin, you're producing and mobilizing adequate amounts of brown adipose tissue, which just puts you in a metabolically advantaged state, all right? But if you're not getting the melatonin production, which you've got to meet 2 requirements. Number 1, you need a biological night. So that means this could actually be during the day, but it's a consistent cycle of when it gets produced. But the other requirement needs to be met, that you need darkness. Your body produces melatonin exclusively in darkness. And so that's one. Also, how do they get that body fat change? HGH production, which we talked about too. Human growth hormone is muscle sparing, and it's a big driver of energy. It's also known as a youth hormone. Kids have an insane amount of HGH being produced. This is why they have so much energy. We have a pretty sharp decline in our production right around 18 to 20. But my argument is that around 18 to 20, we generally in our culture, like we leave the house, we might go to college, that kind of thing, and we no longer have structure, we no longer have rules, and we're not going to produce as much HGH. Third thing, really quickly, is, and this all has to do with the diet and the food choices, is leptin, all right? And I know people have talked about leptin before, but leptin is your body's kind of glorified satiety hormone. And so when you're producing adequate amounts of leptin, you feel more in control, right? You feel more satiated. But when leptin kind of falls off the map, or you have leptin resistance can take place, then we're gonna have some pretty big issues with you regulating your cravings and your appetite. And so Stanford University researchers found that just 1 night of sleep deprivation radically suppresses your leptin. And now I hope folks can start to pay attention whenever you might not get the best sleep, how your cravings change the next day. You're gonna have a tendency to want to, number 1, eat more, number 2, to want to eat more kind of the starchy, crunchy, salty, sugary type things. And I remember my wife, who's actually here, when we had our son, and she's never seen me eat this food. I was sitting there like waiting for the baby to come. I was eating chocolate covered raisins. I'm just like, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. You know, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, you know? And so that's another thing. And last one I'll share, and there's so many that create that change in your body composition, but this one is incredibly important, is cortisol. Cortisol has been drugged through the mud recently. You know, it's getting blamed for everything, but it's not really a bad guy. It's just misunderstood, all right? Cortisol is incredibly important. For example, cortisol is important for your thyroid to work, right? And that's kind of like the metabolism regulator of your body. But here's the thing, just 1 night of sleep deprivation radically increases your cortisol and suppresses melatonin actually as well. But this rise in cortisol has a really powerful ability to start to break down your muscle tissue, which your muscle is your body's kind of fat burning machinery. And so it can convert your muscle tissue into glucose. It's a process called gluconeogenesis as a kind of fight or flight response, because your physiology doesn't know why you're not sleeping. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to optimize your mindset to achieve your goals faster.
You could be anything, man. Like whether you're from the inner city, whether you're from a rural village in South America, Africa, whatever, it does not matter. Like humans are capable of the extraordinary when they put in the work.